so let's get into the when. So this section teaches that just as God has bound all men to observe the Ten Commandments, so he's bound them all to observe the fourth one. That the weekly Sabbath was the seventh day, which we commonly refer to as Saturday, in order of succession from creation to the resurrection of Christ, and that it is the first day, or Sunday, in order from the resurrection onward, and that God requires that this Sabbath be kept holy by preparing for it, by resting from worldly employments and recreations, another example of it not copying, and engaging in private and public worship and works of piety, necessity, and mercy. So one of the things I really like about what it says here too about preparing for it, okay? And I've heard people say this, well, we just have a hard time getting to church on Sunday morning because it's so chaotic and crazy, trying to get the kids dressed, everyone's taking showers. And the answer to that, prepare for it the day before, right? That's the answer. The answer is get ready the day before. If you were, having some special event, you wouldn't wait until the last minute to get ready. At least I hope not, right? So you would prepare for it. Well, Sunday is a special event. It's a very important event. It's an event where the church is gathering to worship, and so we should prepare for it. We should not only prepare for it by making sure we know what we're going to be wearing, if that's necessary. It takes me 2 seconds to figure out what I'm wearing. So I don't usually bother with that because it's not really an issue. But if it is an issue, then you really ought to, plan ahead. Take showers Saturday night, that kind of thing. We have to do that. We have to make sure, okay, who's taking showers tonight? Who's going to take one in the morning? And kind of break it up. Because if everybody takes one Saturday night, the last two don't have any hot water. So we have to break it up a little bit. But preparing, I think that's so important. If we just did that, I think that we would find Sunday is more restful, actually, and more enjoyable if we were not scrambling around at the last minute to get to church. So what he says, resting from worldly employments and recreations. This gets into something that Rob was talking about how a lot of times, whenever a man is being examined for ordination, whether that's to be a teaching elder or even, whenever we have ruling elders or deacons, right, we do ask these questions. Do you have any differences with the Westminster Confession that you disagree with? And there is room for disagreeing with minor things. But nothing that's the phraseology we use is it doesn't strike at the vitals of religion, right? In other words, it's not like we're denying it. I disagree with the deity of Christ. Yeah, you can't do that. I think Calvinism's nonsense. I don't think God chooses us. Okay, we can't work with you, buddy. Sorry. But what does this word recreations mean? See, that's not one of those words, okay, because remember, this is written in the 1600s, okay, so things that they said, okay, we have to go back to what they meant by it, right, and understand. Does that mean, what I can't, go throw a Frisbee with my son in the backyard? Is that what that means? Is that recreation? See, I don't think it is. I don't think that counts as what they meant by that, right? That's what a lot of people say. So you have to get to the meaning of those words of what they meant, and I think what they meant. If I'm trying to remember now what was going on during that time period, and these things occurred in history, right? So there were actually historical issues that they're dealing with in the 1600s that they're trying to counter that were a problem. So so we have to exegete the confession just like we have to exegete Scripture and understand it in its original context. But there were problems with, so I think recreations, as far as me, just if we're just doing playing around with our kids is one thing, but being engaged in organized sports that take us away from worship, that take us away from being around God's people, I think would definitely count under that for sure. I really do. And that is a problem today. So
Piper has some interesting perspective on that for his family.
Yeah.
In that video.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. It's been a while since I've looked at some of these videos, so sometimes I don't remember what I put.
I
So
think he said he didn't allow professional sports going, participating in them, or going to them.
hmm
And what was the other
Or
thing?
watching them.
Yeah, watching, any of that, or there's one other thing I can't remember.
going to the games, and so yeah, and Sunday, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Movies. He said
Movies, that's what it was.
didn't go to movies, right?
Because it's just all worldly, and you're trying to focus and have that day set apart for God.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, especially if you're trying to, you know that the world is trying to push a message to you that's not consistent with the Bible, and then you got to have your hackles up
Yeah.
the whole time.
Yeah.
You know, how can you rest?
Yeah.
If you're being onslaughted the entire time.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
What about people who have to work, like doctors and nurses?
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at sea, I couldn't stop the ship. I mean, that was
Why not?
24 hours.
Throw the anchor out.
No.
We're having church, guys. Come to the poop deck.
And an airplane, the pilot in
Yeah.
the airplane, he
Yeah.
just
we
shut
crossed
it
the
off
international
because
Right.
now it's Sunday.
We're gonna park on this cloud here. Right.
So,
Right.
I
Right.
mean, that's the question.
Yeah.
How can you be a Christian and at the same time a pilot or a police or a nurse or a doctor or whatever?
Well, works of necessity and mercy. Okay, necessity and mercy. So, is there an appropriate place? Like April, Scott's wife is a nurse. She's an artist, so she's sometimes is working. That's a completely different situation. That's we have retired police officers in our church. I'm sure they had to work some Sundays, right? And that's a necessity. We don't want the police to just suddenly vanish. Oh, it's Sunday. We're not working today.
The classic example was, in the Old Testament, you could pull your ox from the ditch if it fell in the ditch
Exactly.
on a Sabbath.
Right.
There's
Right.
that'd be
That's what Jesus says. Which of you, if you had your ox fall in the ditch, wouldn't go pull them out?
Right.
So how much more then, was the whole healing on the Sabbath that we just looked at? Yeah. Yeah. So, right.
I mean, so now you have a choice to work on Sunday, or, for instance, the shops are open, right? There's
Mhm.
people working in the restaurants. We are going to a restaurant maybe on Sunday, or maybe now we're trying to avoid that. But I mean,
Right.
to take gas in your car and all. So there's people working voluntarily on Sunday, and they claim to be a Christian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's-
Yeah. Well, it used to be that a lot of the shops were closed on Sunday. It used to be they all, everybody was off. I mean, Chick-fil-A's been doing it for years, and it's not hurt their business. Yeah. So, it comes down to the business owners. I think that, when I was in high school, I worked at a drugstore, and I had to work some Sundays. And I finally said, look, I don't want to miss church. I need Sundays off. And they gave me Sundays off. They eventually did. So if someone really wants to be at church, they can be at church. A lot of people use it as an excuse. A lot of them don't have to be scheduled on a Sunday. A lot of them do it because they're, and then they use it as an excuse. Well, I have to work.
There are a lot to do it.
Yes.
I work at nuclear power operators. You don't have a choice. You work a
Right, you work right, and that's a necessity.
exactly.
Yeah, we don't want you to leave the nuclear power plant unmanned. That's a bad thing, right? So that's important. Yeah.
But the sad thing is for those who work in restaurants,
Mm-hmm.
what Rob was saying,
Yep.
it's Christians coming out of church.
Yep.
And a lot of communities, restaurants like Zaxby's and others, if you'll show them your church bulletin, you get a discount. I mean, that's where their business is. And
That's right.
so if
Yep.
we didn't fill the restaurants, some of those people.
Maybe they would take note of that and go, yeah, maybe it's not worth being open on Sunday. Yeah. Even I think there's enough people who have gotten away from that. I don't know if we would even put a dent in it anymore at this point. But maybe if 20 years ago we might have actually made a difference. Yeah. And that's kind of been my theory too. That's how I've looked at it. It's very rare if we ever go out on a Sunday. Usually we, eat at home, or eat here if we're having something here. So, So, but we do run next door and grab stuff, don't we, for our church dinners? So
I think the example is how the Israelites, the Jews, they they prepared for the Sabbath beforehand.
That's right.
Including the food.
Collected twice as much the day before the Sabbath, before the Sabbath began. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we could. I'm convicted. I've got some work to do here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Me too. It makes it kind of strange for me,
Yeah.
because I mean, for me, okay, I shouldn't be working on my sermon. I shouldn't be doing any more of that on Sunday, right? I should be only focused on preaching it. So, but I still take off like Monday. That's kind of my Sabbath, where I don't do anything church related. I do. So I'm not real good about that. I still find myself Monday night working on stuff. So or Monday afternoon. So, but yeah. And I think the Sabbath, when God said rest from your work, rest from your worldly employments, He's saying, I didn't make you, design you, because this is all before the fall when He first rested, right? And it's based off that pattern. I didn't make you to work 7 days a week doing the same thing, 7 days a week. That's not how I designed you. You need to get away from that, And even another pastor friend of mine said, I might have mentioned this already, actually. Might have mentioned this a couple of days ago. Or a couple of weeks ago, his wife told him, you're a better pastor when you're not thinking about it all the time. That's what she said to him. This is the pastor at Mercy Hill. And I was like, yeah, that totally makes sense. So, and I think that's kind of the principle there. And that's what we got to get to is what is the spirit of the law, right? Not just the letter, but the spirit of it. And so that's why I think the Sabbath, part of the spirit of the Sabbath is that we are doing things that are restorative, right? If the Sabbath is meant to be rest or restorative, then what does restore us? It could be different things. So like some people might find working in their garden, tending to the flowers, very restorative. Or someone else says, man, that's work. I ain't doing that. Right? Could be different for different people, just depending on, right? The question is, are you seeking it? Are you setting that time aside in order to be restored? Okay, ready to move on to, I think I hit the button by mistake. There we go. Went back too far. Okay. So still talking about the Sabbath day. Now, okay, so we're talking about, we just discussed what to do, right, or what not to do. And again, the Sabbath, okay, just like the regular principle of worship, you can interpret it very narrow, or very rigidly, or very broadly. But what about the day? The day itself, okay? Because Seventh-day Adventists and other groups like them, I remember there was a truck driver who used to come into my old job, and he wasn't a Seventh-day Adventist, but he was like a part of a group that, Sabbath started on Friday at 6 p.m. And he told his boss, this guy's a truck driver, and he was based out of Richmond, Virginia, and we were like Baltimore. So, and he would usually deliver to us on Thursdays. And so he would say, my boss knows I have to be done at 6 o'clock. I cannot be working because that's the Sabbath. And he would just say, you're not worshiping on the right day. And he'd say, where in Scripture does it actually say they changed it? Right? So he really challenged me to really think about this. So, and that's what they'll say. Nowhere in Scripture we told that the day changed from the seventh day to the first day. They say we just kind of made it up. That it was just sort of, on top of that, Seventh-day Adventists actually say that Armageddon is going to be fought between Saturday Christians and the false Sunday Christians. Some of them do. Some of the real radical ones kind of have that view that everyone that worships on Sunday is under the control of Satan and this kind of stuff. It's just really crazy. Yeah, right. Yeah, that too. Yeah. Okay, so why they changed this? So what is our answer to that? Why do we say that it's been changed? Well, first, Jesus rose on the first day of the week, right? That was the day they found the tomb empty. So the first day of the week, they went to the tomb, right? This is Sunday morning, okay? Early in the morning. They find the tomb is empty. We also see the church began meeting on the first day of the week. very early on. We see that with, at one point, Paul is gathered with people, I think in Acts 20-something. That's right. Acts 20, verse 7, on the first day of the week, when they were gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight. Okay, so the church is gathered on the first day of the week. Okay, and then also Paul called for the Corinthians to, on the first day of every week. So, okay, that certainly sounds like a pattern there. The first day of every week, and what was he telling them to do? Take up the collection for the Jerusalem saints, right? A diaconal offering, essentially what that amounted to. Take up the collection for the Jerusalem saints so that they can be supported. So every first day when you gather, do that. Right? So they're meeting on the first day of the week. Okay, and then also we have this with the Lord's Day. The term the Lord's Day comes from Revelation 1:10, where John says, "I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day." So what people have done is kind of tied all these things together to say, see, the church started meeting on the first day of the week, and it was starting to be called the Lord's Day based on what John says in Revelation 1:10. Okay. Now, the biblical evidence of a conscious change from Saturday to Sunday is not abundant, and I'll grant that. However, it cannot be denied the church began meeting on the first day of the week. Now, some reasons why I believe that this was permissible and necessary was, one, I think that, especially during the time when Judaism and Christianity for a while almost seemed like just, Christianity was just like a sect of Judaism. That's how it was treated. Okay, but as that became clear that they were not one and the same, primarily because Jews were saying they are not one of us, they're not part of us, right? So they were being driven out, they were being kicked out. It became necessary for them to begin to, to distinguish themselves. You see a lot where Paul would go into the synagogues on the Sabbath to go reason with Jews. So I think that part of it too was they began to, at least it seems to me, this is just my take on it, is that the Sabbath was a day of evangelism. Okay, going into the synagogues, trying to reason with them with the scriptures. Whereas the first day of the week was the day when they came together to rejuvenate, recharge their batteries, encourage one another, break bread. Okay, so I think that's kind of, in my opinion, how some of this got started. We also see, though, that they were meeting daily in the temple courts there in Acts at the very beginning, right after Pentecost. Right, they're meeting all the time. So, there's like an opening. It's kind of opened up. They're meeting frequently whenever they have opportunities as well. So I think that was one, to distinguish Christianity from Judaism. Also, the seventh day itself was part of the ceremonial aspect of Judaism to some extent and connected temple worship. And so with the abolishment of the location, like we talked about in John 4, came the abolishment of the specific day. Now, the pattern of 1 day and 7 adheres to the spirit of the fourth commandment. And I brought this out to this same fellow, this truck driver. I was like, so how do you know that Friday at 6 o'clock is the real Sabbath? How do you know? How do you know that the calendar hasn't gotten all mixed up over the years, or that it actually is the seventh day from when God created? Like, has someone been tracking this carefully? Like every week, we know exactly what day is the seventh day? I seriously doubt that, I said, so you don't know precisely that it is the seventh day. You just don't know that. And but also we see the Lord's Day as the successor to the Jewish Sabbath, which is what the confession says. We see it as the Christian Sabbath. So that's essentially why we worship on the Sabbath day, or on Sunday, right? Yeah.
Well, I just think of Colossians where it says, "Don't pass judgment on questions of food, drink, regard to a festival, and
Yes.
or Sabbath. For these are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ."
Mm-hmm.
So Christ is what sanctifies the day you're worshiping on, not
Bingo.
the Sabbath day.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that again, back to the whole location thing. It's Christ in the midst of us. That's we can connect with Christ anywhere, right? And I think that it's legitimate to, and actually I think I get into this. I'll get it to it in just a second. Let me. Oh, do you have a question, Rob? Do you want to say something?
No, I was just thinking that when it's Sunday here, it's already Monday in Japan. The time difference.
Right.
So-
Well, as long as they rested when they were supposed to, when it was that day, the right day,
Well,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
irony to me is, first of all, I've never considered Sunday to be the first day of the week. But, physically, I think of Monday as the first day
Yeah,
of the week.
that's right.
Because, and it has to do with the Christian influence on our culture in this country. Maybe it's different in some
Yeah.
other places in the world where they think of different days as the first day of the week. So for me, Sunday is the Sabbath because Monday
yeah.
is the first.
It's the last day of the week for us, right?
But on the other
Yeah.
hand, God's commanded us to bring the best of our whatever we have, and the first of it.
Mhm.
And there's a principle of the first fruits that was
Yes.
practiced in the Old Testament in sacrificing. That when you would have a crop, you would bring the first fruits of it to the house, and that it was actually it was mostly shared with the priests.
Right. Right.
But it was an offering to God, and so the first fruits then is the principle of being prepared,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
principle of giving of your best, so you're gonna give at the and again, my logic doesn't count up against the knowledge and wisdom of Scripture, okay? But so if God says the last, then it's the last.
Mm-hmm. I think there's something to that. I think there's definitely something to that. The first day now is given over as the first fruits of our week. We start by resting instead of ending the week by resting. Yeah. I think there's something to that. That's good. I never really thought about it that way, though. Yeah.
Wasn't it the 8th day is numerically the 8 it stands for the new beginnings?
That's right.
That's
You do see this 8th day thing pop up a lot.
And I think there's a
That's
lot
the
of
day after the
places-
Sabbath, right? So that would be technically the 7th day, but it's 8 days counting, for a specific purpose, every 8 days. Or 8th day of, on the 8th day of after a child's born and they're circumcised, so. That's right. Also, some other things about the Sabbath day. The confession says in the first chapter, if you recall, it says that there are some circumstances concerning the worship of God, the government of the church, common human actions, societies which are to be ordered by the light of nature, and Christian prudence, according to the general rules of the word, which are always to be observed. So we don't have commands about the time worship should begin, how long it should go, or the color of the carpets, right? Just where did God in His Word say we should have green or whatever color this is? Chairs. Someone's going to correct me, I'm sure. It's not green, or whatever, right? We obviously don't have Scripture references about that, right? These can be judged and ordered by the light of nature and Christian prudence and so forth. 10:30, 10:45. When do we begin worship? Scripture doesn't tell us when to begin worship, right? So there is room for flexibility. And I think that extends a little further out than some of our brethren prefer, right? As far as the narrowness, the broadness, right? There is more flexibility in the regulative principle, and that sort of thing. So, and I think the day itself falls into this category, and that's why in Israel, Christian churches, for the most part, they worship on Saturday, along with the Jews. I mentioned we house sat for a family that was in Israel. Okay, he worked for the State Department, and they went to church on Saturday. They didn't go to church on Sunday. And I think that's legitimate. I think that's a legitimate thing to do. They still were maintaining the 1 and 7 pattern. Okay, 1 day and 7. That's really, I think, what is most important is the 1 day and 7. And so we go to say some tribal group in the jungle somewhere in some country where they've never even seen a white man or something, and they have a special day on Wednesday, right? That's their big day that they get together. Well, okay, I think there's a legitimate case to be made just to start doing it on Wednesday, just Wednesday. That'll be the day, the 1 day and 7 that we set aside for worship. So I think there's flexibility on that. And the verse you mentioned, I have them here too, about the fact that Christ is the reality of these things. Christ was the reality of the Sabbath. He's the reality of the temple. He's the reality of all these things. And so it's always important to remember that when working through questions of the law, questions of the Sabbath, questions of worship, elements of worship, the question is, how is this showing us Christ? How is this showing us Christ? How is it exalting Christ? That's the most important thing. And that's what I find missing from all the discussions and debates that a lot of people want to have about, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, How is doing that going to show me Christ? Or not doing that going to hinder me from seeing Christ in all of this and drawing near to him? So that's really the main question that we have to ask. I think that's really the most important. All right. Yes?
You have to be careful not to become a legalist.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's so easy to
Oh, yeah.
stick to that's what the guys in the Pharisees did,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. That's right.
They
Yep.
were so strict and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jesus said, so what happens if your lamb goes astray on the Sunday, Sabbath day? You're gonna rescue.
You have to wait till the next day to go look for him. Yeah. Well, that's what the Pharisees would have said.
Yeah.
Well, no, but they wouldn't have done that. That's what he was calling them out on. He was saying, you would go after him. You know you would.
Yeah.
So why shouldn't I go after this guy and heal him, on the Sabbath, So, yeah, that's right. It is to be a day of delight. There's things that we need to be doing better on, I think, just as Christians. Things that we should be thinking about, how to set the day apart, but not to the extent, of where it's like one thing that Jesus pointed out too. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, right? Remember when he says that? Okay. In other words, we don't exist to just uphold some Sabbath regulations. Okay, the regulations are there to help us, to support us. And the reason why I think God was so strict about it in the Old Testament with the Jews is because they never got a day off. You think Pharaoh gave them a day off? Like said, okay, today's the Sabbath, you rest. No. They were slaves. So for them to think, well, I'm going to continue working, was for them to deny the freedom, to say no to the freedom that God had given them to completely rest on that day and just trust in him and rest in him and rest in the deliverance, right? Because that's one of the things he ties it to. He ties the Sabbath command to their deliverance from Egypt. And that's what they were to be remembering, is that God set us free. But if they're out, they're basically denying that freedom. So there's a lot to it. A lot more could be said, discussed. So but that's the last section there. Any other thoughts or questions? Religious worship in the Sabbath day. Have we straightened that out completely? We are all experts on it now.